Hello again. It's just another day in the life of a military wife. And this week, a lot of really cool updates with the podcast and with me and what's going down. But also, it's kind of that time of year again. Not that there really are deployment seasons. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about deployments. And for people who might be experiencing it their first time as a military family or just a service member in general, or for those who just have questions. So we're going to break that down, explain a few things, and hopefully answer some questions. I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you are listening to Life of a Military Wife. Okay, so let's talk about this. First of all, there's a lot coming up with the podcast and with me. I am doing public speaking events. I will be teaching resiliency classes, and I have a website that will hopefully be up in the near future to address all of that and give you access to all of that. So if you'd like to have me come and teach something about work-life balance or whatever, that will be available on the website. So that is the goal for the next few months. So keep an eye open for that. Also, I've been talking with Maria Strange, and the resiliency class we taught a few weeks ago went really well. We are looking at doing another one in the fall. So if you missed the one that I did, we did this last week on just basically work-life balance and dealing with stress and self-care and all that other stuff. If you are interested in that, we will be doing another one most likely come October, September time. And there will be more information coming with that soon. So I'm excited about all of that. Then we're going to just talk about, it feels like there's not a deployment season. There really isn't, but it just feels like deployments happen in waves depending on where you're at. And I've had a lot of questions lately about deployments and from especially new service members or their families about what they should do to prepare and what are the different types. And a lot of people don't understand outside of the military that there are different kinds of deployments. We call a lot of things a deployment just to simplify it for the non-military community that are not technically labeled as a deployment. And so I'm going to break that down for you guys. So we're going to start off with that. We're going to start off with what the different types of deployments are. I've talked about hardship tours before. Those are not deployments, but for simplification purposes, a lot of service members and their families will label those as a deployment, just because it makes it easier for people outside of the military community. Another one, but what is a real, typical deployment when people think of deployment? The classical definition is to a combat zone. So there are combat deployments. Those are getting less common because we are pulled out of Afghanistan. We are engaged in fewer areas. There are fewer combat zones available to be deployed to. And that does affect things. We're going to talk about pay and other stuff in a little bit. And that comes into play a lot with those different forms of compensation. Also, the duration of the deployment is based on what type of deployment it is. A hardship tour typically is a year. A combat deployment can be 6 months, 9 months, 18 months. There's standardized sizes for combat deployments. The next type of a deployment is a relief effort or aid. So like a humanitarian thing. When the situation with the hurricane in Puerto Rico happened, there were active duty service members who were deployed to help with the situation in Puerto Rico. And so that was a deployment, but it was not to a combat. It was for relief. And so it was, with those ones, the duration is undetermined. We don't know how long those are going to last. I knew a service member who was part of the group sent to Africa to help with the Ebola outbreak. And Again, we didn't know how long that was going to be. So there are deployments that are an indeterminate length. We just don't know when they're going to be back. And then there's training deployments. So the United States sends military units all over the world to train with other militaries and to get experience and practice different scenarios. And those training deployments, they can be a month, they can be 6 months, they can be a year, they can be all different lengths depending on what the purpose of the training is. And those are called a deployment, but they're not your classical deployment because you're not typically in a combat zone. You're doing something else. And then the last one is specific to the Marines and the Navy. This is a shipboard duty. It's your year at sea, or there's lots of different terms for it. But basically, it's a deployment. They're gone for a year. They're on their ship duty. But it's just different because Navy don't typically get deployed to the middle of the desert because, well, there's not much for them to do there. So that's their kind of combat sort of deployments. So I do know that Coast Guard can also get sent on deployments. They do harbor patrol and stuff. I've had family members who were Coast Guard who did that. So there's a lot of variety. So when someone says the word deployment to you, if you're not in the military community, it could actually mean a lot of different things. Inside the military community, we tend to be a little bit more specific with each other about what kind of a separation it is. Again, I'm going to apologize for a little bit. I'm not sure if you're hearing this, but it's a super windy day here and I live in military housing. Therefore, you can hear the wind. I'm not sure if the mic is picking it up, but just in case it is, that's what the weird noise that sounds like trains in the background. So those are the different types of deployments, quote unquote. Like I said, really only the combat deployments are what people typically think of as a deployment. That said, when you get into all of these different things, your pay is going to change. And if you are a new service member, this can have a whole lot of ramifications for stuff. I have a family member who was single and deployed several times, and instead of trying to maintain a home base, they put everything into storage and just banked all of their pay and saved it because of advantages to doing that when you're single. There's a lot of different ways to handle the whole pay situation. So we're gonna tackle that now. Some of the different types of pay that affect family. So when you're having a hardship tour, there is some compensations that come for that. Separation allowance comes with any of these. If you are separated from your family for 30 days, then you will get your separation allowance, family separation allowance, if you have a family. The good thing about that is because when you are deployed or gone, they will take away your BAS, or your basic allowance for subsistence, which is the pay you get for your food. And so if your family uses that money to help with groceries, and now all of a sudden you're gone and the Army's paying for your food, then that's $300. The separation pay is not quite the same amount. It's $50 less, but it at least helps balance for that loss of pay. Then you have different types of pay depending on what type of an area you're in. There's special pays like hazardous duty pay, career sea pay, flight pay, hostel pay, combat pay. So there is a lot of different types of additional pay or that you can get when you are in those different zones. And that really does help out families a lot Again, if you're single, it's great because you can bank that and save it, and that will help you in your future. If you're wise, you will put it towards things like my family member who did it. They saved up their money and they were able to buy different things that they needed, cash, instead of having to have payment plans. So it helped them financially to stay out of debt. If you have a family, though, those can help your family meet needs that they might have because you're gone. So, for example, when my husband was on a hardship tour and I was disabled, it helped us pay someone to help me with keeping up the house because he wasn't there. I couldn't mow the lawns. I couldn't do a lot of these other things. And so I was able to pay people to help me with the things that I physically couldn't do. So it was a huge deal. If you are working, it can help with childcare. So yeah, it has a lot of different benefits for those families. And it's important to know exactly which one you're going to get based on where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing. And have that clarified ahead of time so you know what your pays are going to be. And when you're going through your deployment briefings, they should be covering these things with you. And if they're not, ask those questions. Those are good questions to ask. If you are the parent of a single service member, always making sure you have contact with the person who's in Rear D so that you can find out any of these things if you need to help your service member with them. There's a lot of different moving parts when it comes to deployments, but pay is definitely it's really important. And it can get really complicated because here's another layer. Combat zones are tax exempt. So soldiers and warrant officers receive a tax exemption when they are deployed to combat zones. So when you go to do taxes, let's say they're deployed during tax season and you're having to do taxes for them and they were in the combat zone. If you're the parent, you're going to need to know what's tax exempt and what extra pays they have and all of that sort of stuff, just so that you know how to do it properly to help them out if they're not able to. Or if you're the spouse, same deal. You need to be able to know what is and isn't applicable to the taxes and all of that stuff. The exception to this is there are certain duty stations, like the MFO in Egypt, that's a hardship tour, that have been, I believe, added to the tax exempt status. So even if you're not in a combat zone, you might be in an area where you have a tax exempt status, and it's good to know those things. So these are questions you need to be asking. Because again, we're hitting tax season, and knowing what you have to declare on your taxes and what you don't is really important. And just knowing which questions to ask is super important. So those are things that not everyone who is new to the ball game are aware of, and it's important to know, especially if you have a single service member and you're a parent and you're trying to help them out. So just things to be aware of. And so all of those different things, by the way, in regards to taxes, most duty stations have like a thing set up to help you with your taxes. If you are a service member, there is no excuse to like be lost in the dark not doing your taxes. There are resources. Check out wherever your duty station is and find out. There is usually someone who can help you prepare your taxes, and typically it's for free. So that's an important thing. Again, because it's tax season, just, letting you know about that. Another thing to be aware of with deployments, and this is something that not everyone thinks about. So if you have a family and you're a service member, that's what I was trying to say. If you have a family and you are a service member and you're leaving them behind, it is imperative that your spouse has certain things, that she has a power of attorney, that you guys have a living will, you have a will, that you have all of those documents figured out. And a lot of time units will focus on all of these documents they want you to get done. But then there's a little thing they don't always remember to tell people. And I know this because we've lived this. We didn't know and things came up and I didn't have what I needed. Your spouse needs to have access to all of the passwords and logins for DEERS and different things like that. Because if anything comes up with your pay, with DEERS, with TRICARE, with all of those different things, or if you're in housing, and this one my husband did think of, thank goodness, because when you live in a military housing, or at least in the military housing we are in, only one person from each household can be logged into the maintenance app and the maintenance system at a time, which I think is slightly ridiculous, but whatever. I'm not in charge of that. So my husband was the one logged into the maintenance system before, and he made sure to switch it over to me when he left on his deployment, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to put in different requests for maintenance. Okay, so basically, it's just important to make sure that they have all of the logins they need, whether it's for auto insurance or for military stuff, for bills or whatever. I'm going to be completely honest about this. I have got a totally not great memory for passwords and logins, and so I have a special location in my house where I keep those written down in case my brain, just collapses on me, just doesn't work, and I'm needing to log into something, especially the stuff that my husband has set up, because we all have our favorite methods for creating passwords, but everyone's brains work differently. My husband's brain and mine work very differently, and so the passwords he comes up with are not intuitive to me. So it's just important to make sure that you're on the same game page with all of those logins and stuff like that. If you are a single soldier, it is important that your parents or someone you trust desperately and understands OPSEC, operational security, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, has some access to some of these things too if they're trying to help you out with stuff like taxes and whatnot. So again, find a trusted person back home who can help you with those things. The other thing is communication, depending on where your service member is being sent. Different cell phone plans and different things are going to work better. I've talked about this before, but for us, we've tried the T-Mobile International plans, and that was okay. We've used Google Fi, and we liked that a whole lot better. It was a lot more cost effective, and the service was just better. Make sure your phone is unlocked. If you have a cell phone that you have bought from a provider, you can take your orders, your military orders in and say, hey, I need you to unlock this phone. I'm going overseas, yada, yada, yada. And they will. Also, if you have to cancel a plan or whatever, they can't charge you for that. If you are a single soldier and you're renting an apartment and you need to get out of your lease, again, make sure you have a copy of your orders, show it to them. They'll have to let you out of the lease without any, legally they're required to, without charging you anything. So that's an important thing just to know. Have copies of your orders and be able to show them to the people that need to see them. If you're changing your cell phone plan, if you're shutting off internet or whatever utilities, so that you're not getting these disconnection fees, or if you're canceling a lease or whatever, so you're not getting fees for that. That's important. But anyway, making sure you've got a way to communicate with your family back home is vital. And it's going to vary drastically depending on what your deployment is. So if you know someone in your unit or whatever who's been to this area before, pick their brains, find out what works for that region, because every situation is different. Like I said, all of those different ones are completely different. Now, some of these training ones, you may not have to change your cell phone plan or anything like that, especially if you're only going to be gone for a month or two. And if your training assignment is stateside, you may not have to make any of those adjustments. It's just being aware of what you've got to do and making sure you get it done. So, again, it's just that kind of time of year with it being taxes and I've gotten a lot of questions about deployments from new military families in the last month or so. And so it's just been on my mind, and I wanted to kind of share some of these things that are not always covered or explained to the spouses or family members. So again, if you have a single soldier, they're at the briefings, they're getting all this information, but they may not be clearly communicating it to their parents or whoever their at-home support system is, their family member or adoptive family or whatever. Likewise, the spouse may not always be able to attend to some of these briefings that have all this information. And I just wanted to help clear up some of the confusion that I've been getting in questions from listeners and just from friends in my day-to-day life. So that is why I was covering deployment stuff today. That said, I think a really important factor in deployment that people just don't always think about, and I have talked about this before with my whole episode on long distance dating, which if you haven't seen it, it's one of my first episodes, and it's part of the reason why I did it so soon on in this podcast is because I find it so important. Maintaining long-distance relationships is not easy, but it is vital. Keeping up communication with close family members and friends. Again, doing it in a way that is keeping in mind of OPSEC, making sure that the people you are communicating with understand OPSEC, and that you are abiding by operational security is important. But having a connection to home really, really can help with the loneliness and the stress and the fatigue that comes with deployment. And having that connection to home will help the service member do their best and be their best if they're not having to worry about how things are going back home, because they know how to communicate and the family are communicating clearly. That said, there's going to be things that you're just going to have to handle as the family members at home, and not stress them out about, because they are going to have a lot on their plate. They're going to be dealing with a lot. Sleep deprivation is common in combat deployments and even other types of deployments. And so there are going to be times where they're not going to be able to talk and they're not going to be able to help you with a problem. And you're going to need to be able to face those things and handle them without them, just so that they can fulfill their mission as a service member in the United States military and do their job to protect and serve us. And so it's understanding that trade-off and just coming to terms with it. It's not always easy and it's not always fun, but it's just how it is. I actually was watching a movie with my husband. It was about an Army chaplain who was deployed. It's Indivisible. It's a really, really great movie. It's based on a true life experience of a real Army chaplain who was he was stationed at Fort Campbell, I believe, at the time that the events of the movie took place. Or he was stationed, I don't know, anyway. But it was just really well written and really well done. It helps very clearly depict how hard it is for the families at home and how hard it is for the service members, and how they're both struggling with things, and they kind of have to give each other grace with their struggles. And they have to understand that even though they're a team and they're a couple, that there's things they're going to have to do by themselves, because that's the nature of military life. But that doesn't mean that those things have to tear them apart. they can be something that brings them back together. So it's a great movie. It's kind of weird to be throwing out a movie recommendation on a topic like this, but honestly, as a military spouse, that movie helped me better juggle the frustrations I have had with being left behind and understanding that they're having bad days and they need love and support and encouragement. We do too. And different kind of bad days. Let's put it that way. But anyway, that said, I am really grateful for all of the support and encouragement I've been getting from all of you. Again, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, if there is a topic you would like me to cover, please let me know. As I get closer to the launch of the website, I will be giving you more information, and feel free to contact me if you want more information also about the resiliency training in the fall. I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you have been listening to Life of a Military Wife.